Good day, everyone. Great to see you all here. I'm Rob Tatro from robtatro.com, portfolio manager here at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management and the Tatro Wealth Advisory Group. I'm excited for another edition of the Tatro Show. I will bring in our guest. We'll talk a little bit about his outlook on the real estate. So as a reminder, I am not your investment advisor. Do not take this as investment advice. If you do want investment advice on this, please go to speaktorob.com, www.speaktorob.com. We'd be happy to give you a no obligation consultation. All right, enough about that. Let's bring in our guest. I'll pause no further. I will bring him in. Luciano Diorio, welcome. Great to have you here. Managing Director at Cushman in Wakefield, Quebec operations, an expert in his own right, young guy who's done a ton given, I say young guy, you mentioned it yourself, young guy, who's done a ton overseeing a pretty big team out there in the entire Quebec regions. He is the Quebec operations Managing Director. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
My staff have been, like, for the vast majority, more effective working from home. So that's why the people are going to ask the question, right? Like Diego and Mox are able to do everything they were able to do here from home. So people are going to ask the question, even if 10 or 20 or 30% of the people choose to work from home.
Right.
And to bring up Matt Allard's question again, our city councilor, what will be the implication for land values if I used to need 8,000 square feet, but now I only need 5,000. Doesn't that directly cause a reduction in demand long-term? So short-term, it's not going to change because I can't change my lease here, obviously, right? But maybe when I'm renewing in 3 or 4 or 5 years or 8 years or 1 year, maybe I'm not taking 8,000 square feet. Maybe I'm taking 5,000 square feet because 30% of my staff are working from home. And wouldn't that automatically have a trickle effect on the real estate values, Luciano, or do you think it wouldn't impact it?
Again, I think short term, I think we're certainly going to see an impact, but long term, I think we're going to go back to some of our ways, and I think we're going to see that maybe this doesn't work necessarily with 100% being working from home, and we need some sort of a team collaboration so we need space. And it's interesting when I look at office space and the way office space is built. When I first started in my career, you had the closed offices, and all the closed offices were on the perimeter wall, and so like all the bosses got the nice view and everyone else had like the interior view, no window, barely saw any sunlight at any time of the day. Now we've switched to the offices are on the interior with the exterior workspaces open to everybody. That was kind of the next generation. And going into this, we saw a lot of collaborative spaces. And so the square footage didn't really change per se. It kind of it made for other uses. So the game rooms and the cafes and the slides and all of these other things that we're seeing in some of these in these tech companies where, the actual square footage per person didn't really change.
Basically, the space that the remote workers have are going to turn into ping pong rooms and whatever it may be.
Well, again, I mean, it's not a one size fits all. I think there's going to be some companies that are going to say, fine, we will, this was a great experiment and it worked. People are going to work from home and our employees are happy. And there's some others that are going to say, look, our employees are not so happy. Interestingly enough, Cushman and Wakefield, we had a study that came out where we had asked Gen Zs and millennials. We asked all generations, but Gen Zs and millennials were the ones that were having the toughest time with working from home. And I find that fascinating because today when we look at our work pool, we've been doing everything we can to try to attract these millennials and these Gen Zs to basically come to work for us as opposed to someone else. And so when you see that they're having actually a harder time with working from home, that kind of surprised me. But then when you kind of dig into it, you realize it's not so out there as an idea.
Mm-hmm. Headline on BNN Bloomberg today that I saw that I thought I'd mention to you. It's on their top page. It said 16% of commercial tenants in Canada failed to pay their May rent. And this is they're quoting Colliers Canada. So 16% of commercial tenants didn't pay their rent in the month of May. First of all, did you expect that number to be higher or lower? And maybe you could clarify for the viewers what's happening with most of these? Does it just get tacked on to the back?
So, well, it depends. So I'm not sure exactly the actual survey, so I didn't have a chance to see that. But so 16% of commercial tenants. So I asked the question, is commercial tenants, how do they define that? Is it retailers? Is it office? Is it industrial? Is it a combination of the three? So I'd certainly be interested to see that. But I think, a retailer that was forced to close, and again, I'll look at in the case of Quebec, where you were kind of forced to close on the 13th of March when the premier came on and said, Quebec is taking a pause, and if you're a non-essential retailer, you're basically shut. They're certainly going to have trouble paying the rent, and they're certainly going to want to make some sort of an arrangement or an agreement with their landlord, and to find a way out of it. Some landlords I've heard have been tacking it on to the back of the term. So if you had let's say a lease term of 5 years and there was a year and a half left, then whatever months that we have spent in confinement would be tacked on to the back of the lease. Some landlords have said clearly, I understand that there's a program from the federal government. I will not participate in that program. And so I was going to say the French word. I was going to say tant pis.
Too bad.
Too bad, right? And so those tenants are looking to for help from their lawyers and trying to use lease clauses and figure out how to get around it. On the office side, there's some office tenants as well are looking at their leases and they're looking at their clauses and saying, I haven't really been able to use my office space, and so I need your help. Landlords, please help me. And again, tack it on to the back. On the industrial side, actually, that's the asset class, Rob, I'm feeling like there's less noise from in the sense where that's probably the one that's going to do very well out of this because of how retail has shifted towards e-commerce. And certainly in a city like Montreal, where we're a port city and connected to, major networks of infrastructure of, highways and so on, and very accessible to major markets in North America, I think that the industrial is going to do well. Sorry, I went all over the place.
That's good. But kind of like me when I answer questions. We're talking rents, we're talking real estate. Just to put a bow on that article, looks like the number was 21% in April. 21% of commercial tenants in April requested rent relief. And of those, about 42% went back to paying their rent in the month of May. And the rest are still kind of either making partial payments or trying to get there. The idea is that this will likely take, I don't know, several months, I would imagine. Maybe more, maybe much longer before most of those are likely back to paying their rent. There's an article here about housing starts as well. And I'm not sure how much comment you can make about housing starts, but everywhere was down in May, housing starts, except Quebec, surprisingly, maybe. So housing starts would be the year-over-year number of how many, individual housing starts. And the number was very good in Quebec. The rest of Canada was down a little bit. Ontario was down about 40%, looks like. Overall, down 20% year-over-year. I'm guessing that doesn't surprise you. And then my follow-up question would be, what does that do to prices? Because we didn't see a drop in prices in Toronto and in Vancouver in the large. So you just basically have less volume, but higher prices, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to speak too much to it because it's not something that I know well, but I mean, obviously being in this market and being a consumer in Quebec, I see it around me. I can say that our market was red hot leading into this pandemic, and there was record employment levels. There were people were basically, if they quit their job today, they had a job tomorrow morning. No issues. It was the first time where we weren't depending on one sector of the economy to prop us up. We had like multiple things that were, kind of helping us up. So it doesn't surprise me at all. Again, we haven't overbuilt in this province. So we didn't overbuild on the office side. We didn't overbuild on the industrial side. And when it comes to housing, same thing. There's demand for housing, and it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, you guys were red hot. The Quebec stocks, the Quebec play, were starting to become very sexy again, right? The stock market, the companies out there, you guys were no longer seen as a flight risk, right? Like you're not separating. I think the market would expect that. So as a result, some of your Quebec companies were starting to look very, very attractive and had gone on a really, really good run. It was cool to invest in Quebec again.
I could just tell anecdotally from the calls I would get from my colleagues across the country. So we were supposed to have an in-person real estate forum coming up in the month of May, which was going to be like a sort of industry leaders, and typically it attracts some people from Ontario, and investors from a little bit across Canada. But this time I was seeing people were calling me well in advance, wanting to come to the conference, wanting to be in Montreal. And this is besides, the other obvious great things about this city, but people wanted to be at that conference and wanted to hear what was making us, what was the secret sauce in Quebec, what was going on, and they wanted in. So I'm hoping that as we start deconfinement, that some of that is going to come back. But obviously, we're all in it together, globally. So be interesting to see.
Wonderful city, beautiful city, Montreal. Great stuff tourism wise too. So many things to do with your family if you do go there.